Welcome to the Real CP Show. I'm your host, CP. And today's topic, which should be also very interesting, called the Negro 1951 Petition to UN against the US for genocide crimes against the Negro. Let me repeat that. Today's topic, the Negro 1951 Petition to the UN against the US for genocide crimes against the Negro. What other culture or cultures, race, alternative lifestyle categories, ethnicities, you just name it, have had such a continuous onslaught of hatred, discrimination, oppression continuously for generations, other than the African American Native blacks? What others have had this continuously happen to them and get no reparations of no sort, and have so many internal problems of trying to please however numbers of personnel that continue to keep putting oppression upon them, and are additionally doing the proverbial ostrich in the sand tactic continuously, doing the continuously, I see no evil, I hear no evil, what is evil, can't spell evil, man, I know nothing, I see nothing. Oh, Schultz on Hogan's Heroes. That's a very interesting show. There is no comparison. What other comparison is there of the categories I just mentioned of personnel have such achievements in the U.S. while going through so much for generations? There is no comparisons. So it's very interesting that when I did a show not too long ago about how I was talking about how the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against the Black, Brown, and Indigenous people that was held in October of this year, when it was talking about how the U.S. was found guilty of, what was it, crimes against humanity or something like that. It was something about the U.S. was found guilty of crimes against humanity. But the word switchery, which can be construed as very vile and dastardly, because, let me read this again, the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people was held basically a couple of days in October of 2021, right? The main theme of the tribunal was listen to the key word, I get to the point I'm getting at, we still charge genocide. In recognition of the recharged genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people, a 1951 petition to the UN signed by dozens of notables. Okay, let's keep that in mind for the person who have not heard that before. And listen to what can be construed as word switchery, dastardliness, and an insult to the American Black forefathers and foremothers, especially in that time frame, and ones that, still alive, that seen that form of segregation against American blacks that had nothing to do with what we want to call Asians and call Hispanics and call indigenous people. Had nothing to do with them. So how is that again? This International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses relates against black, brown, and indigenous people. Now remember I relayed right that the theme is we charge genocide, right? Excuse me, we still charge genocide in recognition of the recharged genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people, right? In 1951 petition to the United Nations signed by dozens of notables. Now, remember the key where I said we still charge genocide. See, again, supremacists, the most brilliant mental manipulation force that has ever existed. They're like octopus tentacles. They have their hands in so many different areas that unfortunately millions of American blacks don't even know the games of agendas that's being used. They'll use other organizations, other people, dilution tactics, add the dastardly and disgusting thing of just talking about diluting down the American black pain with adding black, brown, and indigenous people, or they do black and brown coalition, they'll sit there and do people of color minorities. These type of word switchery tactics are vile, right? Because it's still nothing specifically talking about blacks, American blacks, helping American blacks that are owed so much reparations, so many programs, so many lost opportunities based upon racial terroristic acts against them for generations before many other cultures even existed in the country. But getting to the key point here, let me read you some things from 1951 petition. The actual petition, let me read you in general the actual petition in 1951. It talks about we charge genocide. 1951. What did I sit there and read you a second ago? Where it's talking about we still charge genocide, right? Relating to the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against black, brown, and indigenous people. That was held in October, a few days in October of this year, October of this year. I think it was this year. 2021, right? But then when you look at the actual the overall actual document of the 1951 petition, it says we charge genocide. What I just read you, it talks about we still charge genocide. But when you look at the document, it says we charge genocide. But listen to the words I'm going to say on this. We charge genocide. I'm reading from the document. We charge genocide. The historic petition to the United Nations for relief from a crime of the United States government against the Negro people. Let me read this again to you. We charge genocide. This is from the 1951 petition to the U.S., right, about crimes that is saying relating to, hey, man, we want to file a petition against the United States for genocidal things against it. Anyway, let me read this. We charge genocide. The historic petition to the the historic petition to the United Nations for relief from a crime or crimes of the United States government against the Negro people. You hear exactly what I just relayed. It said the historic petition to the United Nations for relief from a crime or crimes of the United States government against the Negro people. How is it that when I did a show, like I said, not too long ago, about when it was talking about how the U.S. was found guilty of crimes against humanity and, relating to it by the International Tribunal on Human Rights, abuses against the black, brown, and indigenous people. Do you see the word switchery? So International Tribunal on Human Rights abuses against black, brown, and indigenous people. The main theme of the tribunal was we still charge genocide. Right? In recognition of the recharged genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people. Do you see it's even showing that? It said the crime of government against the Negro people. So how is it that what I just read a little bit earlier there, it said the International Tribunal on Human Rights abuses against black, brown, and indigenous people. Boy, this is some dastardly stuff, isn't it? Oh, it can be construed as dastardly things. But I'm just going to go over just some of these things, okay? I don't want to read a lot about this on this because there are quite a number of things to read. But I just want to just keep in mind what I just read, all right? I can't keep saying this enough. The International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people was held a couple of days within October of 2021. Um, the main theme of the tribunal was "We still charge genocide," in recognition of the recharged genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people, a 1951 petition to the UN signed by dozens of notables. So even though it says against the Negro people, how is it that what I just read earlier talks about the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against Black, Brown, Indigenous people? It's like when people put stuff right in front of many Black folks' face and pretend that they didn't put that what they put on there. This is very vile, or can be construed as very vile on that. I'm not saying personally, I'm not saying that. I mean, whatever I'll say on that. But I'm relating to people that use logical analysis say, wait a minute, what they got to do with Black, Brown, Indigenous people, that petition from what you just read, or the some of the parts I just read, right? But let me just read the overall petition of 1951, what I'm talking about. I'm just going to read a few pieces of it. I'm just going to kind of go through it a little bit, right, okay? Because I don't want to try to keep this show long on this one. The new acts of genocide. I'm just going to read you a few parts of this section. Since the preparation of the first edition of this petition in October 1951, the following new acts of genocide against the Negro people have been reported. Where did you hear what I said against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people? Where did I say that? See, it's almost like an insult that you got personnel that know what they're doing, but they cannot just stick to talking about Black pain. They got to include other people that have nothing to do with them. Have nothing to do with them. An enforcement person took the life of this particular Black man and wounded another Black man, 23-year-old Negro prisoners, whom this enforcement person was driving to a retrial, which would have proven conclusively their innocence of a false, I'm not going to say the whole word, the R word, right? No, the R word, charge. Talks about how neither of certain parts of the government, nor in this particular state, officials, that they did not act to punish this particular enforcement person for their cold-blooded murder. Where did it say anything about Brown and Indigenous people on that? Another particular enforcement person, an example, took the life of this Black man, 33-year-old Negro, who had filed suit in a federal court seeking the right of Negroes to vote. No action to punish this particular racial terrorist person had been taken by a certain type of agency in this state. Think about that for a second, right? So all these things about voting rights, and here it is. They ain't got not a darn thing to do with talking about Black and Brown, Brown, Indigenous people, and other personnel, and the Asian personnel, all this kind of stuff. But how many people are going to benefit off all this voting rights and things like that? That had nothing to do with many of them. They weren't going through Black pain. And any type of comparison for their own cultures or backgrounds, and certainly not alternative lifestyle categories where they didn't have to worry about talking about disenfranchised voting because a person is within alternative lifestyle categories. But that's not really going to be brought up, is it? Because again, you do have good people from different backgrounds and culture, ethnicities, and even certain parts of alternative lifestyle categories. But I don't want to go into that because that's a whole different topic in itself. Okay, but keep going with examples. It's other particular Black man, a Negro seaman aboard a U.S. freighter flying trader, who was shot and killed by the ship's captain. his racial terrorist person, who was notorious for his racism. The seaman was in shock and pleading for mercy when he was shot to death. The racial terrorist was exonerated by a certain type of gov commission on the ship's return to the U.S. Where did it say anything about a brown or indigenous people or Asian personnel that was aboard this freighter and they were shot and killed by the ship's captain, who was notorious for his racism toward them? Because it didn't say that. So again, how's again the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against black, brown, and indigenous people? What an insult. I'm just reading something here. I don't want to read that part. No, that's a little too much on that. So this other one. For the third time in 1951, a Negro housing development in this particular southeastern state was dino-boomed by racist terrorists. No effort by a certain type of agency or agencies within this southwest or southeast state did anything to apprehend nor jail the racial terrorists that had not been made. 15 Negroes that died in a train collision in a certain part of a southwestern state, another southwestern or southeastern state, because of state and railroad officials. 15 Negroes died in a train collision in this particular state, in southeast part of the U.S., because of state and railroad officials compelled them to sit in a segregated car, a converted baggage car in the forward part of the train. 2 small Negro children were among the unfortunate ones that did not make it. Where did you see anything where it says against brown and indigenous people or Asian people? This is from the 1951 petition that I'm reading from. So again, where is this about? The International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against black, brown, and indigenous people, right? What's held in October, a couple of days in October 2021, basically. Because again, when I did this show relating to that, it was talking about how the U.S. was found guilty of crimes against humanity, basically. This is ridiculous, right? This is ridiculous. On that, let me just keep going. Assembly to the General Assembly, because there's so many different things on here. This petition is just a very interesting petition. Okay, I'm just kind of looking at something. Compound time. The chest of civil rights is defending liberty. Oh man, good tonight. But man, as I say, no. But may we add as a final note that the Negro people desire equality of opportunity in this land, where their contributions to the economic, political, and social developments have been of splendid proportions and in quality second to none. They will accept nothing less and continue efforts to force them into the category of second-class citizens through force and violence, through segregation. Racist law and an institutionalized oppression can only end in disaster for those responsible. That's from the 1951 petition. I'm just looking at certain sections. That is from the 1951 petition, right? The Negro petition. Right? That was put forth toward the U.S. Right? For genocidal crimes against the Negro. That's what the petition is saying. So how is it that when you hear what I just read, the International Tribunal on the Human Rights Abuses against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, right? Uh, that came around, a meeting was came around October, a few days in October 2021. The main theme of the tribunal was we still charge genocide in recognition of the recharged genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people, a 1951 petition to the UN signed by dozens of notables. So again, the main theme was what we still charge genocide, right? In recognition of the recharged genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people. So how the frogapong tail doesn't make any sense what I just read about the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against Black, Brown, Indigenous people. Do you see the game of this? The atrocious game of this. And I'm sitting there reading you the overall 1951 petition that says nothing about brown indigenous people. This is so ridiculous, right? Let me the opening statement. Let's read something. A review of the case and offer of proof giving something of the scope and historical background of the genocide being committed against the Negro people of the United States. That's part one. It says the opening statement. On this petition, where did it say anything about brown indigenous people or even Asian people? Because it did not say that on the petition. So how in the heck, to chaka tail, is there black, brown, and indigenous people being brought up? Brown and indigenous people being brought up. Do you see the atrocious behavior of this? Or what can be construed as atrocious? So instead of being about blacks, he got to add brown indigenous people? And how many of those personnel can't stand black folks? I said, how many? Oh, you trying to say that? Oh, brown people. Stop! You can jump into a lake of fire with that bull crap. See, I want people that I know enough of the games. Ain't going to be fooled by this nonsense. It's an insult to the American black foremothers and forefathers who went through this terribleness of former segregation not a long time ago. In 1950, well, I don't want to go there right now. So let me continue to keep reading what I'm reading because this is so ridiculous on this. The General Assembly of the UN, excuse me. The responsibility of being the first in history to charge the Gov of USA with the crime of genocide is not one your petitioners take lightly. The responsibility is particularly grave when citizens must charge their own Gov with basically taking the lives of its own nationals, with institutionalized oppression and persistent slaughter of the Negro people in the U.S. on basis of race. Why does it say anything about against brown and indigenous people, and also Asian people? Nowhere does it say that. So again, how does it again that the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses has against black, brown, and indigenous people? Now, who cares what I'm talking about on this? I'm just reading what logical analysis. Where does it make any sense of this? Because the main theme of that get together was about what? We still charge genocide in recognition of the recharged genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people. But then right above that, it says the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against black, brown, indigenous people. It's like people just put stuff right in front of the American blacks' faces and just say, okay, okay, so we know we're playing games. So what? What are you going to do about it? We're gonna keep diluting things around. And we're going to sit there and add some fake sellout numbers of American black folks. We like sitting there getting numbers of fake American blacks. We've been using them for a long darn time. We just opened up a shelf and just started picking out little names of fake American black Negroes. They're so easy to spot. They're so easy to fool. They're easy to fool. And again, that's why I'm gonna say again, and I stick by what I say on this. The African ancestors of Native blacks only have half a generation to one generation left for the complete overall demographical finishing them upon the American blacks, and half a generation to one generation left. There will be no cultural survivorship past half a generation to one generation. There will be no overall cultural survivorship of the American black. It is done with, and I stand by what I say on that. Just watch and see. Just watch and see. There's too many darn problems going on within the culture, and there's too many people that are not recognizing the atrocious game that's going, or games that's being played. Again, just like people utilizing border breaking illegal immigration personnel that are breaking immigration laws every freaking day across that border. Just sitting there laughing, as I've already stated that in another show, sit back laughing. Breaking immigration laws, sitting there getting free resources left and right. Sitting there, a person can have this child, that child, get free resources. That child or infant or children sit there and get free food stamps, shall I say, other type of food opportunities. The children, infants, whatever it is, free medical, free dental, and you get rewarded for breaking border immigration laws? What an insult. But where did I sit there and read anything about legal immigration in that petition? Because they weren't even thought of. And how many of the border breaking illegal immigration personnel are benefiting off again? What? Black pain! This is an insult. Oh well, this is an insult on that. Let me keep reading here. This is so ridiculous. Okay. Okay. Your petitioners will prove that the crime of which we complain is in fact genocide within the terms and meaning of the UN Convention providing for the prevention and punishment of this crime. We shall submit evidence tragically voluminous of acts committed to intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethical, racial, or religious group as such. In this case, the 15 million Negro people of the UN. Where does it say anything about brown, indigenous people, or Asian people? What an insult, right? Because again, I'm not going to repeat it again. I already said it about 1,000 times about the International Tribunal and things like that. What was found, about crimes against, I'm not going to read the whole thing, should I say, about the International Tribunal on Human Rights abuses against the black, brown, indigenous people. Nowhere did I read anything, and what I just read, anything where it says brown, indigenous people, or say Asian people, right? It said 15 million Negro people. Oh boy, let me keep going. We shall offer proof of economic genocide, or in the words of the convention, proof of deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its destruction in part or in part. We shall prove that such conditions so swell the infant and maternal death rate and the death rate from disease that the American Negro is deprived when compared with the remainder of the population of the U.S. of 8 years of life on the average. Further, we shall show a deliberate national oppression of these 15 million Negro Americans on a basis of race to perpetuate these conditions of life. Negroes are the last hired and the first fired. They are forced into city ghettos or their rural equivalents. They are segregated legally or through sanctioned violence into filthy, disease-burn housing and deprived by law of adequate medical and education. From birth to death, Negro Americans are humiliated and persecuted in violation of the Charter and the Convention. They are forced by threat of violence and imprisonment into inferior segregated accommodations, into Jim Crow buses, Jim Crow trains, Jim Crow hospitals, Jim Crow schools, Jim Crow theaters, Jim Crow restaurants, Jim Crow housing, finally into Jim Crow cemeteries. My goodness. I was going to read some more about this petition, but I think I'm just going to skip down to a lot of other parts, one of the last particular parts of this. I don't think I need to go any further with that part, what I just read. So I'm just going to read this last particular section on this, because after what I just read, I think that's quite enough on this. Yes, I'm just going to get to this last particular part. I was going to read some other stuff, but I think what I just read sums up quite a lot on that. And what I just read, word that had anything to do with brown and indigenous people or Asian people, that what people wouldn't even thought of like that in 1951. Not like that. So show where we will call Asian people were Jim Crow'd on all those different categories I was talking about. When in 2021, they still make up a small percentage of the population. So you can imagine, so American blacks make up about 12 to 14% of the population only. Overall, plus or minus, Asian people make around about 5 to 6% overall, right? 5 to 6, maybe 7% of the whole population. Think about 5, 6, 7% of the whole population of Asia in the U.S., and you compare that to back in 1951. They wouldn't even or be even thought of. Indigenous people, that surely wasn't even a conversation. When you say brown people, what does that mean? Because again, there are black folks that have brown skin. So you see this atrocious game that's being played when people say black and brown. And by the way, show me what these brown people were Jim Crow in these theaters and swimming pools and hotels and motels, grabbed up by the Klan members with their racial terrorism acts, right? Show where they were grabbing up brown people out of their houses. Show that. Show where they were fireboomed on transportation, should I say, commercial buses, freedom rides. Show where the freedom riders and those buses were being fireboomed because they were brown people. Because there was no such thing as that. Show me all the lynchings that was happening more than black folks, that brown people were getting lynched more than black folks in the 1950s. Show where Asian people were being lynched in the 1950s like black folks. Show where indigenous people were being lynched and Jim Crow left and right like American blacks, because there is no such comparison. Do you see where I'm coming from? Or illegal immigrant border breaking people. Show what else going on. Show what alternative lifestyle category will be in Jim Crow left and right. Again, being pulled out the house because this person, that person was of a church lifestyle category. So the Klan members were grabbing up people from that category because they lived a different lifestyle. Because it didn't happen like that. Do you see the nonsense of this? Because it's so ridiculous that this stuff is not even, it's so obvious when you see this kind of stuff. Right? And I'm not talking about the literal sight. I'm talking about in the mindset sight. When you look at this stuff, it's like, my goodness, it's ridiculous. This game is ridiculous. And this is 1951. I'm talking about Petition. The 1951 Petition. And here it is almost a couple of generations later, and still the American black is still the most oppressed, the most racially hated, the most racially discriminated, the most racially hated, the most racially discriminated, the most racially oppressed, and still getting reparations. Wow. So I'm trying to finish up because I'm not trying to. Man, because it's so much. It's an interesting topic to me because it's so much. It's so ridiculous that a person can just look at this stuff. It's like, my goodness. Why is it that the wording of brown and indigenous people was added to the International Tribunal's meaning on that in October 2020? 21 for a few days, couple of days. What brown people, indigenous people are adding, where the original 1951 petition had nothing to do with brown indigenous people or Asian people. But people just going to add them in there anyway. Boy, I tell you. Wow. Wow. Oh, man, I wanted to finish up, but it was something, I wanted to read something else. It was something I just wanted to read. Let me see if I can find it before I may finish up on that. I'm just scanning through this petition again. There are some other different things I was going to read. Oh man, but I'm about to cut it short because the time is getting. I don't want to go into this a lot more longer. Under this thing called Clan Terror. Under this thing called Clan Terror, with statesmen justifying genocide. It remains for others in the scores of vigilante organizations that adopt the South, chartered and encouraged, as we shall show, by the various states to carry out the crime, more specifically, great inflammatory anti-Negro meetings, in which thousands of rogue members participate, are common throughout the South, particularly during election years. This particular person, who, I'm going to all that, was known as the Railroad Evangelist, told a meeting of the Ku Klux Klan in this particular southern city, in southern state, for example, November the 1st, 1948, in God's sight, it is no sin to take the life of an N-word, for an N-word is no more than a dog. Where do they say anything about brown people like that? Where do they say anything about indigenous people? Where do they talk about, where the claim member talking about alternative lifestyle category personnel? Where were they talking about, where did this person talk about border breaking illegal immigration personnel? They didn't, did they? Where are they talking about immigrants? They said N-word. Let me repeat what he said. In God's sight, it is no sin to to take the life of an N-word, for an N-word is no more than a dog. Now, again, that is religional atrocity for this person to say God's sight, but that's neither here nor there, which is a whole different topic in itself, right? How many of the same racial terrorist people that will relay over the word God out of their mouth and go to church the next day or a few days after lynching an American black Negro? How many? It wasn't just numbers of white males, which is a different topic in itself. It was however many females within predominant-based culture. See, all this, which I don't use the word Karen. I don't utilize that because I don't go on all that because other people's names are Karen, right? Right? See, or it's like Brad. I don't use names like that. Now that's for me. Other people use it, then that's okay. That's on them to do that. I'm saying I don't utilize that. That's too much more of a generalization to use those names like that. I look at the individual person and I look at the individual person, what they're doing, and I make sure to put the individual person doing the situation. I don't want to just put them in a group of numbers of females called Karen and look if they're and they doing that. No. Individual Karens, you want to call them that? No, I look at the individual personnel within females within predominant culture, the ones that are doing these heinous anti-black terrorist things against American blacks. I look at them as individual people who are doing those things. See, which is a whole different topic, right? It's a whole different topic in itself. Because, see, in this system of supremacy being brilliant, see, and they got so many people just only talking about numbers of males within predominant culture doing things, and then completely forget or minimize it or say it, but still really don't just stick when numbers of racial terrorism, numbers of females, the ones who know who they are within predominant culture, that are doing these things, right? And no laws, no policy is going toward them, is it? Nope. What do you mean? I'm not going to play that game. Not going to do it. Because again, you think it was just numbers of males within the predominant culture that were participating in lynchings of American blacks? are sitting there watching American blacks being lynched or segregated and stuff like that. You think of just numbers of males within predominant culture doing that? See, that's the power of numbers of women within the predominant culture who sit back and laugh as well. Because many of them can do what they want to do. And, yeah, a few people call them out certain things a little bit. They say, we don't care about that because it's only about a few amount of African and Native blacks and very few others that call out numbers of females within predominant culture, the ones that are doing the anti-black terrorism. No, I'm talking about the very few amount of those females within the predominant culture who ain't about that. Credit given to you. Keep doing your thing. Because there are numbers of females within the predominant culture who have lost their lives. Right? We're trying to fight for the justice for the American blacks. And credit given to the ones like that. And their soul, hope they rest. And the very few still, in the present day, the ones that may be women within the predominant culture, very, very small, minuscule numbers that do the same thing present moment. Credit given to you. Do your thing on that. But that is not the representation of overall masses within the predominant culture. How many of them can't stand American blacks? Just like how many Hispanic personnel, again, some good, numbers bad, that can't stand American blacks. How many of Asian personnel, some good, numbers of them can't stand American blacks. How many numbers of what we call indigenous people that okay, but how many numbers of them can't stand American blacks? How many border-breaking people, well, neither here nor there on that surely can't stand American blacks, but sit there and just use them to get, we're people of color like you, we're minorities, and you can't, and American blacks can't break immigration laws. You see the nonsense of this kind of crap? There's numbers of good people within our alternative lifestyle category, and numbers of not so good people within an alternative lifestyle category. How many numbers of personnel within an alternative lifestyle category? And there is a gigantic amount of examples to show that can't stand American blacks. Let alone there are some numbers of American blacks that within a lot alternative lifestyle category, they still not getting it. And how many of them? Some of them were relayed themselves that within a turned lifestyle category that there is racial racist. So which one is it then? Because race comes first, not a lifestyle. A different topic. But like I was looking at the Klan terror, this is just ridiculous, man. This stuff keeps happening in even present time. Okay, so I'm trying to, I read that already. Mental harm. I didn't even go over this, but psychological terror. Our evidence includes many instances of psychological terror and mass intimidation on the basis of race, particularly as perpetrated by the Klan. Keeping on going. He was talking about how this particular category of Klan officer position in a certain southern state reported on April the 1st, 1946, that he conferred with a gubernatorial candidate on ways and means of keeping this particular state in southern states, the Negroes, from voting. He called upon every, this particular senator in another southern state announced, he was talking on the radio, he announced that he was a Klansman. He called upon every red-blooded American in this particular southern city or southern state to resort to any means at their command to prevent Negroes from voting. After a good deal of violence against those Negroes who tried to vote, this particular senator was re-elected. On March 2nd, 1948, 300 robed Klansmen in this particular city in the southern state paraded around the courthouse square and burned a cross there on election eve. Whenever the Negro takes his place at the side of the white man, blood will flow in the streets of the South. Wow. On March 20th, 1948, at this particular city in the southern state, crosses were burnt on the courthouse lawn on Saturday and Sunday nights before the county primary day. Small coffins labeled KKK were placed on the of those Negroes who it was thought might try to vote. I don't get the understanding. I do understand very well relating to, well, some other things I don't get on that. But there are just some things, man, that I understand enough. I'm just reading you some of this stuff. So again, how is that what I've read about that tribunal and things like that, where it was sitting there including black, brown, indigenous people instead of saying black? Even though the 1951 petition specifically talking about Negro, it wasn't talking about brown people, indigenous people, who wouldn't even be thought of like that. Do you see this atrocious behavior like this? I'm not saying it personal. I'm saying the logical analysis dictates. That's common sense what I'm reading on this. So how can a tribunal relate over black, brown, and indigenous people when they had the petition 1951 had nothing to do with brown people or indigenous people? They certainly wouldn't be talking about black and brown people at that time like then. And like now, they sure won't be talking about no indigenous people being Jim Crow'd all over the darn place. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And the thing with this voting thing going on, right? Oh man, you got all kind of people from different cultures jumping up and down, talking about voting rights and all this kind of stuff. And what did I sit there and just read you? Where did they say anything about all these other different people going through this pain? Like black pain, like black folks going through not a long time ago. And again, what, you think it was just numbers of males within the predominant culture that was sitting there doing these things toward American blacks? As if there was no women within certain parts of the predominant culture that was right along with them? See, that again, that's one of taboo topics that's still not talked about. And it's like on things, I don't know what is going on with numbers of American black women. I'm not talking about the some that understand it, because that's not enough. That's still sitting there thinking that they are equal to numbers of women within the predominant culture, the ones who in that non-true femininity type of wording. No, I'm talking about feminism, terrorism type personnel who know they are. That sit there and use numbers of American black women for that feminism, atrocious mantra, anti-black, pseudo-anti-black movement, right? But they use American black women for their benefit to endorse that atrocious not femininity movement, but atrocious feminism vile movement on that. And you got numbers of American black women that still can't understand that. Numbers of women within the predominant culture can't stand numbers of American black women. They can't stand them, with few exceptions. When you look up 1920, 19th Amendment of the Constitution, what was going on back then? Was it just American black males that were getting lynched left and right? Of course not. Well, it was a lot more than obviously than American black women. But were there some black women that was getting lynched? Of course. Were there women that obviously were being Jim Crow left and right? Of course. Still going 1920. But wait a minute. Were not women supposed to have the right to vote in 1920? Which actually, that's a lie, because you still had numbers of women within the predominant culture that was voting before that. See, people keep playing that same sorry satanic game. There were still women within the predominant culture that were voting in however different places. But the same dastardly demonic game is that you got people talking about women in general could not vote before the 19th Amendment of the Constitution, which is a darn lie. And they never talk about which women who benefited off the 19th Amendment of the Constitution. Because if American black women, American black women were equal, then why would you need a Voting Rights Act in 1965? If women are supposed to be equal to vote. Just saying. on that. But just think about this voting thing. It's quite a number of things about um, the vote and denial of the right to vote for black folks in this petition. Had nothing to do with brown people, had nothing to do with indigenous people, and certainly had nothing to do with Asian people, of no comparison. So again, I asked, why is it again? When I was reading that thing to you again about 1,000 times about the tribunal talking about black, brown, indigenous people, when the original petition had nothing to do with brown, indigenous people, nor Asian people. Just saying. Just saying. Just saying. But you're gonna have, coming up next election year, midterms, and then the presidential election, then the same old cycle rotation of people sitting there getting up, trying to get the American vote, American black vote, using how many of American blacks for whatever Pacific political party, and never getting anything out of return. Happens every single time. It's been going for generations. What an insult. Instead of holding however political entity, demanding from that political entity, okay, you get in the office, we'll give you about 4 or 5 months to get something done, or do not ask for our votes at all anymore. But that's not going to happen overall as a American black society overall. It's not going to happen. So then again, you got numbers of personnel from Asian culture, numbers of personnel from Hispanic culture, and et cetera, et cetera. Heck, you got numbers of however millions of people from border breaking, illegal immigration personnel that sit back laughing, just waiting for supremacy to go ahead and give the go to do the magic wand and make millions, several millions of border breaking, illegal immigration personnel having the right, legal right to be in this country. Then they can sit there and be able to vote. They're sitting there just waiting and playing the game. And American blacks overall don't even see what's about to even happen toward them. Within half a generation, 1 generation left, very few amount of American blacks will be used enough. I mean, there'll still be a few out there to get a few of votes here and there, but then they're not going to need the majority of American black votes in half a generation, 1 generation, as they have done up to present, because, they're just not. They're just not. Demographic onslaught is heading toward the American blacks society overall. They don't even realize it overall. So I'm trying to help and close this because it's so much. I mean, it's just interesting information on this. So brother say there's so much stuff on here. Say the American black was the revolution where the American people for their advocacy. The genocide that was American slavery, the killing of part of the group so that the remainder could more readily be exploited for profit, resulting in 2 wars. But the American Civil War was a revolutionary war in which the American people destroyed the slaveocracy, that minority of slave owners, that word again, who had controlled the country and its government for generations. In the wake of its conflict, a rising industrialism, then the dominant and most revolutionary current in American life, joined with 4 million liberated slaves, some of the poor whites, that's a different little situation, of the South, to impose a democracy on the former slaveocracy or something like that, give the Negro the right to vote and to participate in the South's political life. Right? And that's supposed to be Civil War. So how is it that what I just read that was going on after the Civil War, people were sitting there doing, just racial terrorist things against black folks to get them not to vote? Think about that for a second. Just saying. So I guess I need to hurry up and close this down a little bit because there's so much stuff on here. Because it's talking about after Reconstruction, which is a whole different thing. The growth of terror section. It was during this period of American imperialism, a venture abroad, that most of the state's laws segregated Negroes, and illegal denying them the vote was enacted in the southern states. Genocide and war. Thus, there is an ample historical precedent for genocidal crime increasing against the Negro people in time of war or threat of war. as it is now increasing and has been since 1945. Mm, 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 mm. Okay, this is the last part I'm going to get to because there's so much information on this. It's just very interesting. Yeah, this is really the last part here. I'm trying to read here. Um, okay, our case is strong because it is true, as it cannot be effectively denied that mortal dies. So it cannot be convincingly said that the Negroes in the United States are not persecuted, segregated, assaulted, and killed day in and day out on the basis of race and in such numbers as to make this oppression an American institution. Mm, mm, mm. So what I just read to you, because I definitely was going through different parts of the petition because there's other things I was going to read about, but it's just so ridiculous, the obviousness of what I just read. So there are personnel who've heard about this, very few, and there's quite enough personnel who have not heard about this. And I just kind of wanted to read some things from that 1951 petition on that right, that on that petition that was called Recharge Genocide. Recharge Genocide, the historic petition to the United Nations for relief from a crime or crimes of the United States government against the Negro people. And so what I just should have read, again, somebody will look at this and say, wait a minute, that really does sound beyond nonsensical relating to when it says the International Tribunal finds the U.S. guilty of crimes against humanity. Let me read this again. International Tribunal finds the U.S. guilty of crimes against humanity. And then it talks about how, again, for the last time I'll say this, the International Tribunal on Human Rights Abuses against Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples was held October in a few days in October 2021. The main theme of the tribunal was we still charge genocide in recognition of the recharged genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people, a 1951 petition to the UN signed by dozens of notables. I sit there and read you what it said, right? I sit there and read you what it said about recharged genocide, the historic petition to the United Nations for the relief from a crime of the United States against the government of the Negro people. So again, lastly, I ask this question. How is it that what I just read that had anything to do with had anything to do with brown indigenous people? Or even Asian people or term lifestyle category, it wouldn't, would it? But specifically sticking to this thing where it's talking about brown and indigenous people, adding with the Black in there, when the petition was talking about specifically Negro Blacks. Do you see this atrocious, nonsensical, supremacist behavior, right? Because the same tired, archaic game is that it seems to be that when Howard personnel, they just do not want to just stick to talking about Blacks. I'm not talking about the sellouts. I'm not talking about the unfortunate ones that think when they look in the mirror, they say, well, my skin is not black. I'm just human. Okay. As if people don't see color, right? So not going religional, I'm just saying. So if the Almighty God, creator, source of sources, wanted people to all look the same, then that Almighty creator, source of sources would have made people look the same. Just saying to you, right? So I hope this is interesting on that, because last thing I want to say, because it's still a powerful thing. It's still a very powerful thing that I read. I don't know how many times, because it's just it's just difficult not to read this because it's so powerful, because it still continues to this date. It still continues to this date how powerful this statement was, or is, should I say, about when you have numbers of American Blacks that want to see no evil, hear no evil. What is evil? We're just all humans. Right? The most hated group ever in the country, the most oppressed people in the country forever, the most discriminated, oppressed, hated people ever within this country for generation up to present, the American blacks. The crime stats show it very much so still in this 21st century, whom are at the top of the anti-racial category. Anti-black is at the top of the category, not anti-Hispanic, not anti-Asian. And still no reparations. But how many people sit there and find laws and policies for just like the other personnel in alternate lifestyle categories? So for what I just read you about the recharge genocide in this situation that had nothing to do with brown and indigenous people, but at the same time within the International Tribunal, what I just read to you, when it talked about again and added the word brown and indigenous people that had nothing to do with anything. So again, it's not me saying, I'm just relaying logical analysis. So I hope this was interesting. And I did want to try to read this last thing about called The White Man's Bible, 1981. The N-word or N-word. We use the term N-word deliberately in this book and recommend its usage in general conversation. As we have stated in a previous chapter, the second dumbest creature on the face of the earth is one who can't or won't recognize his enemies, and the dumbest of all is that creature which will actively collaborate with his enemies for the destruction of his own race. It's pretty straightforward on that. I thank you for tuning in to the Real CP Show, because again, I utilize these shows as a historical timepiece, because American blacks overall have half a generation to one generation. And supremacist understands that more and more numbers of American blacks are going to keep putting their head in the sand, while at the same time other people just continue to bypass over and over many American blacks. And just because there's a few American blacks now means nothing, because again, unless the life is is short-lived, that the people eventually will get old. And when people get to a certain age, most people don't even care what you've done anyway, how much money you made. They don't care, especially toward American blacks. But the thing that still is going to be residual is the American black hatred of numbers of American blacks by the millions. That is going to continue. And the thing about it that's going to finish them overall is, again, helping other cultures out first, while not helping their own out, the American blacks first, as other people first and foremost help their own out first. I thank you for tuning in to the Real CP Show. Thank you.